Jake had always been a solitary man. He wasn't lonely, but he liked his routine. He enjoyed the long, quiet days on the ranch, waking up before dawn to check on his cattle, spending his afternoons fixing fences or mending broken tools, and ending the day with the setting sun casting its golden light over the open fields. The ranch had been in his family for generations, and it had always been his home. There was no place he would rather be. Life was simple for Jake. He didn't need much, just his work, his horses, and the occasional visit from the local townspeople. It was a life that suited him just fine. But that all changed one fateful afternoon. It was a clear, warm day in late summer, and Jake was tending to the horses when he saw a car pull up on the narrow dirt road leading to his ranch. The vehicle was old, the paint chipped and faded, but it seemed to be struggling with something. The engine sputtered as it slowed to a stop right in front of his gate. Jake wiped his hands on his jeans, puzzled. It was rare for anyone to come this way, let alone someone in need. Curious, he walked toward the car, his boots crunching against the dry dirt beneath his feet. As he got closer, he saw a young woman behind the wheel. She had long, dark hair that cascaded over her shoulders, and her face seemed flushed as though she had been trying to get the car running for quite some time. She looked up, startled, as Jake approached and quickly opened the door to step out. "Hey there," Jake said, his voice low and calm. "Looks like you're having trouble with your car. Can I help?" The woman let out a sigh of relief. She looked a bit out of place, dressed in a nice jacket and pants like she had just stepped out of a city office building. Her eyes were a bright shade of green, sharp and full of life. But there was something else hidden behind them, something Jake couldn't quite place. "I'm so sorry to trouble you," she said, her voice soft yet tinged with urgency. "I'm Evelyn. My car broke down and I've been trying to get it started for the past hour, but it's just not working." Jake nodded, taking a moment to study her. She looked clean, well-dressed and well put together, but something about her body language seemed off. She was tense, like she was trying to hide something. Maybe it was just the frustration of the broken-down car. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just lost or stranded. There was more to her than met the eye. "Well, I have a phone in the house and I can call a mechanic for you. Or if you want, you can come in and I'll give you some water while we wait for someone to show up," Jake offered. He wasn't the type to invite strangers into his home, but something about her presence made him feel oddly compelled to help. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, looking around as though she were weighing her options. She seemed like she wanted to refuse, maybe out of pride or a need for independence, but in the end, she sighed and nodded. "Thank you. I would appreciate it. I've been on the road for a while and I could use a break," she said, offering him a faint smile. Jake stepped aside to let her pass, watching as she walked towards his house. There was something about the way she carried herself that caught his attention. Her grace, her poise, but there was an edge to her too, like she was trying hard to keep something buried deep inside. As they walked through the door of his modest home, Jake offered her a seat by the small kitchen table. He grabbed a pitcher of water and filled a glass before setting it in front of her. Evelyn took it gratefully, her hands trembling slightly as she held the glass. Jake took a seat across from her, observing her in silence. It was awkward, but he didn't mind. He was used to silence. He wasn't one for idle chatter, but he couldn't help but wonder what had brought her out to this remote place. The ranch was miles away from any city or major road. People didn't just end up here by accident. "Where are you headed, if you don't mind me asking?" Jake finally asked, his voice breaking the silence. Evelyn looked down at her hands for a moment before answering, as though she were choosing her words carefully. "I'm on my way to visit family," she said, her voice quieter now, as though the mention of family made her uneasy. "I've been driving for a while, but I needed to stop. I wasn't expecting any problems with the car, but here we are." Jake nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. She didn't look like someone who had just been on a long road trip. There was a restlessness about her, something that didn't quite fit. Her eyes were darting around the room as if she were expecting someone, or something. Before Jake could ask her more questions, there was a knock on the door. He stood up quickly, a little too abruptly, and walked over to answer it. A man dressed in a dirty mechanic's shirt was standing on the other side. "Howdy, Jake," the man greeted him, tipping his cap. "Heard you had a car issue out here. Thought I'd come take a look." Jake stepped aside to let the mechanic in, but before he could say anything else, Evelyn stood up quickly. "No, thank you. I'll just wait for the tow truck." I don't want to bother anyone more than I already have, she said, her tone suddenly sharp and anxious. Jake turned to look at her, a little surprised by her sudden change in behavior. Her body was tense again and her eyes were wide, almost desperate. It didn't seem like a simple case of a car breakdown anymore. Are you sure? I can't leave you out here without help. It's not safe, especially with that car sitting in the middle of the road. It's the least I can do, Jake insisted. But Evelyn just shook her head, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. I'm fine, really, she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I just need to be alone for a bit. I'll be okay. Jake wasn't sure what to make of it. Something about Evelyn's strange behavior didn't sit right with him, but he didn't press the matter further. He knew that sometimes people just needed space, and perhaps that was all it was. He showed the mechanic to her car, where they discussed the situation briefly. The mechanic promised to take care of things and assured Jake that everything would be fine. But as Jake walked back to the house, he couldn't shake the feeling that Evelyn was hiding something that made her act so strangely. He glanced back at the house, where she was sitting by the window, staring out with that same far-off look in her eyes. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt like his quiet life on the ranch might be about to take a turn he hadn't expected. Little did he know, Evelyn's arrival was only the beginning of a story that would change everything. The next few days were quiet, and Jake tried to return to his usual routine, but there was something different about the air. Every time he crossed paths with Evelyn, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her presence seemed to linger, almost like an unseen force in the house. She was polite, kind, and grateful for his help, but Jake could tell she wasn't fully at ease. She never stayed in one place for too long, and she always looked over her shoulder, as though someone might be watching her. She spent most of her time reading by the window or walking around the ranch, always gazing into the distance as if searching for something, or maybe running away from it. Jake couldn't understand why she was acting so strangely. The days turned into nights, and the cool, starry evenings were filled with silence. Until one night, everything changed. It was after dinner when the air between them shifted. Jake had just finished cleaning up the dishes when he found Evelyn standing by the door of the kitchen, her back turned to him. She was gazing out into the dark field, her hands resting on the wood of the doorframe. There was something unsettling about her stillness, a kind of tension that filled the room. Jake, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, I need to tell you something. Jake stopped in his tracks. He hadn't expected her to speak so seriously. He turned to face her, unsure of what to expect. She turned her head slightly, just enough for him to see her face. Her expression was different now, more open yet tinged with a kind of sadness that wasn't there before. The distant look in her eyes had softened, but it was replaced by something else, something vulnerable. What's going on, Evelyn? Jake asked, his voice calm but concerned. You don't seem like yourself lately. Is everything okay? She hesitated, her fingers tightening against the doorframe as though she was fighting with herself about whether or not to speak. For a long moment, the silence between them felt heavy, thick with unspoken words. Then slowly she turned around to face him, and for the first time, Jake saw a flicker of something raw and honest in her eyes. I don't know who else to turn to, Evelyn began, her voice trembling slightly. Jake, I'm running from something. From someone. And I don't know how much longer I can keep hiding. Jake stood still, his heart racing. He had expected something, but not this. Evelyn wasn't just a stranded traveler who needed a little help. There was something much deeper, something much darker, weighing on her. Who are you running from? Jake asked carefully, his words measured but filled with genuine concern. He had already guessed that she was hiding something, but now it felt like the truth was about to spill out. Evelyn took a deep breath, as though steeling herself to reveal something painful. She stepped away from the door and moved to the couch, sitting down with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He's been following me for months, she continued, her voice cracking with emotion. At first I didn't think it was serious. But then it started getting worse. He's someone from my past, someone I thought I could escape, but no matter where I go, he finds me. I thought I could lose him for good, but I've been wrong every time. He's never stopped looking for me. Jake listened in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. Her voice wavered as she spoke, but her eyes were focused and intense, as if she were telling him the truth that she had carried for so long. She wasn't asking for pity. She wasn't even asking for sympathy. She was simply asking for help. "Who is he?" Jake asked, though he didn't really need an answer. He could see the fear in her eyes, and he could hear it in the tremor of her voice. This wasn't a simple case of a troubled past. It was something far more dangerous. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped her eyes, gathering her thoughts before she spoke again. "He's a man I once trusted. He was someone I thought I could rely on. But over time, I started seeing another side to him, a darker side. He became controlling, possessive, and I realized I had to leave. So I did, but ever since then, he's been hunting me. He has people everywhere watching me. I can't even be alone without wondering if he's nearby, waiting for me to make a mistake." Evelyn paused, taking another deep breath. Jake could see how hard it was for her to continue. It wasn't just the words that were painful. It was the fear, the weight of the situation that had clearly broken her down over time. "I thought coming here would be different. I thought I could hide, that I could start fresh. But I'm scared. I feel like he's closer than ever." Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. He had thought Evelyn was just a lonely traveler, someone passing through. But now, with her words hanging in the air, everything had changed. She wasn't just a stranger. She was someone in real danger, and that danger was now slowly creeping into his life too. For the first time, Jake felt a deep sense of responsibility. His quiet, isolated life was about to be thrown into chaos. But something told him he couldn't just turn his back on Evelyn. There was no turning back now. "What do you need me to do?" Jake asked, his voice firm yet gentle. "How can I help?" Evelyn looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. She knew asking for help was a risk. She had already put him in the middle of something dangerous, but she also knew that she had no choice. "I don't know what to do anymore," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I just need to know I'm not alone. I need to know that for once I'm safe." Jake's heart ached for her. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weariness of someone who had been running for too long. It wasn't just the fear of a person chasing her. It was the toll it had taken on her mind, her spirit, her very sense of self. "Don't worry," Jake said softly, his voice resolute. "You're safe here. I'll protect you. You don't have to run anymore, not as long as you're on this ranch." Evelyn's eyes softened at his words, and she gave him a small, tearful smile. For the first time in days, Jake saw a flicker of peace in her expression. It wasn't much, but it was enough to know that in that moment he had given her a small sense of relief. But Jake also knew that this was just the beginning. Evelyn's past was now intertwined with his life, and the danger she faced wasn't just hers to bear anymore. As much as he wished to protect her, he had no idea how deep this trouble ran, or how far it would come to chase her. As the night drew on, the house seemed quieter than usual, almost too still. Jake sat down beside her, unsure of what to say next, but both of them knew that something had shifted. The calm, peaceful life Jake had known was slipping away, replaced by something far more uncertain and far more dangerous. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment he knew one thing for sure. Evelyn was no longer a stranger. She was someone he had promised to protect, and he wasn't going to let anything happen to her. The next morning would bring a new set of challenges. But for the first time in a long while, Jake felt like he was finally living a life that mattered. The days that followed Evelyn's confession were filled with an uneasy sense of anticipation. Jake found it hard to focus on his usual work. The quiet rhythm of life he had once known on the ranch had been replaced by an undercurrent of tension. Every time he stepped outside, he looked around, wondering if someone was watching, wondering if the person who had been chasing Evelyn was already on his way. Jake had lived his whole life in this small, quiet town, and while he wasn't unfamiliar with trouble, he had never been involved in anything like this before. The thought of someone deliberately hunting Evelyn down made him angry. He wanted to protect her, to keep her safe from whatever darkness was following her. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized just how unprepared he was for what might come next. Evelyn spent most of her time inside, still uneasy but also grateful for the small moments of peace the ranch provided. She would sit by the window, looking out over the wide open land as though trying to find some sense of comfort in the vastness of the world around her. But Jake could see the worry in her eyes. It never left her, not even when she smiled or when she tried to act like everything was normal. He knew that she was still haunted by whatever had driven her here. One afternoon, after a long morning of working in the fields, Jake walked back to the house to find Evelyn sitting on the porch. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over the land. Evelyn was gazing out into the distance again, but this time, there was a different look on her face. She wasn't just looking. She was waiting, her eyes scanning the horizon as though expecting something or someone to appear. Jake approached her slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel path. He had learned to move quietly over the years, but it didn't matter. Evelyn turned to face him before he could say anything. "You're still worried, aren't you?" Jake asked softly, standing a few feet away from her. It wasn't a question he needed an answer to. He could see it in the way her shoulders were slightly hunched, the way her fingers curled into the armrest of the chair she sat in. Evelyn nodded, but her gaze didn't leave the horizon. "I don't know how much longer I can keep running, Jake. I thought if I came here, maybe I could be safe. But I keep hearing his voice in my head. I keep wondering if he's out there looking for me." Jake felt a pang of frustration. He wanted to tell her that she was safe, that no one would find her here. But the truth was, he didn't know that for sure. He didn't know what kind of man she was running from, or how far he was willing to go to track her down. The more Evelyn talked about him, the more Jake began to realize just how dangerous this man might be. "I'm not sure what else to do," Evelyn continued, her voice trembling. "I've tried everything, changing my phone number, moving to different places, but he always finds me. He has people everywhere. I've been through this for months, Jake. I don't know if I can do it anymore." Jake took a deep breath. The weight of her words was heavy. He had always been a man of action, someone who knew how to fix things, how to solve problems. But this was something completely beyond his control. He wasn't a detective or a private investigator. He was just a rancher. Still, he couldn't sit by and do nothing. Not now. "I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this," Jake said after a long pause. "I may not know everything about what you're going through, but I do know this. You don't have to face this alone. I'll do whatever I can to help you." Evelyn finally looked up at him, her eyes full of gratitude but also a deep sadness. She wanted to believe him, but part of her was still afraid. She didn't want to drag anyone else into her mess, especially not someone as kind and genuine as Jake. But deep down, she knew that she had no choice. She couldn't keep running forever. "I appreciate that, Jake," she said quietly, "but I don't want to put you in danger. He's dangerous. He's been watching me for a long time. If he finds out where I am—" Her voice trailed off, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the trees around them, adding to the stillness. Jake understood her fear, but he also knew that the longer she stayed hidden, the more at risk she would be. The man who had been hunting her wasn't going to give up. Jake knew that now. "You're not a burden to me, Evelyn," Jake said, sitting down next to her on the porch step. "I'll protect you." "I don't care what it takes. No one is going to hurt you here." Evelyn seemed to relax a little at his words, but her worry was still clear. She wasn't used to depending on others, especially not like this. She had always prided herself on being independent, on handling things on her own. But this time it was different. The weight of her past was too much to carry alone, and for the first time she was allowing someone else in. Jake didn't know what the future held, but he knew he couldn't turn his back on Evelyn. She had come to him for help, and he wasn't about to let her down. Still, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of his mind that things were only going to get worse before they got better. The next day, Jake made a decision. He couldn't just wait around and hope that everything would work out. He needed to take action, and he needed to do it now. After breakfast, Jake drove into town to talk to some people he trusted. He didn't know what he was looking for exactly, but he knew that if he wanted to protect Evelyn, he needed to find out more about the man who was hunting her. He spoke with a few locals, asking around without revealing too much about the situation. He didn't want to make it public knowledge that he had a woman staying with him, especially not one with a past as dangerous as Evelyn's. But he couldn't shake the feeling that someone in town might know something, anything that could help him understand the threat he was facing. As Jake drove back to the ranch later that afternoon, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He hadn't learned much, but there were whispers of a man who had been causing trouble in the area. No one knew much about him, but there were enough rumors floating around to make Jake nervous. He didn't know for sure if the man chasing Evelyn was the same person, but Jake couldn't take that chance. When Jake returned to the ranch, He found Evelyn inside, looking more anxious than ever. She had heard the truck pull up and she had been waiting for him by the window. She hadn't said much, but Jake could see the unease in her eyes. "What did you find out?" she asked, her voice shaky. Jake didn't want to worry her too much, but he couldn't lie. "There's talk of someone in town, a man who's been causing some problems. I don't know if it's the same person you're running from, but I'll be ready for whatever comes." Evelyn nodded, her face pale. She knew Jake was doing his best to protect her, but she also knew that the danger was real. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was certain. She couldn't stay hidden forever. Jake could only hope that the man following her wouldn't find his way to the ranch, but in his heart he knew that the peaceful days he had taken for granted were over. The real fight was just beginning. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Jake tried to keep his normal routine, feeding the cattle, repairing the fences, and tending to the fields. But his mind was never far from Evelyn. He couldn't help but wonder if the man she had been running from was closer than ever, or if Evelyn's past was catching up to her in ways they hadn't yet realized. His home, once a place of peace and quiet, now felt like a battleground. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind through the trees, made him think of danger lurking just beyond the horizon. Jake hadn't told Evelyn everything he'd learned in town. He didn't want to worry her further, but the truth was he felt as if they were both in over their heads. It wasn't just the man Evelyn was running from anymore. It was the fear that he might find them here, at this secluded ranch. Jake had always known the world was full of dangers, but now they were staring him right in the face. Evelyn, for her part, seemed to be holding up better than Jake had expected. She spent her days helping around the ranch, cooking, cleaning, and even trying her hand at feeding the animals. She didn't ask for anything, and she worked with a quiet intensity, as though she was trying to forget the heavy weight of the past. But Jake could tell that beneath the calm exterior she was still struggling. There were nights when she would sit up late, staring out of the window, her face drawn with worry. Jake wasn't sure if she was hoping to see something, or if she was simply trying to outrun the memories that haunted her. One afternoon, as Jake was finishing up some work in the barn, he heard the sound of a car pulling up. He stopped what he was doing and looked out from the barn doors, squinting into the bright sunlight. It wasn't unusual for people to pass by on the road outside, but this was different. The car that had pulled up was a sleek black sedan, one that didn't belong in this quiet part of the world. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He didn't recognize the car, and the way it parked right near his gate made him uneasy. He wiped his hands on his jeans and slowly walked toward the driveway. As he approached, the car door opened and a tall man stepped out. He was wearing a suit and he had a cold professional air about him that immediately made Jake suspicious. The man didn't seem surprised to see Jake. Instead, he gave him a nod as though he had been expecting him. "Afternoon," the man said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "I'm looking for someone. Name's Evelyn. You wouldn't happen to know where she is, would you?" Jake felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about the man's calm demeanor that made him uneasy. He knew instantly that this was no ordinary visitor. This man was connected to Evelyn's past, and the fact that he had shown up on Jake's doorstep could only mean one thing: trouble. "Evelyn isn't here," Jake said, his voice firm. He stood his ground, but inside he was already preparing for whatever might come next. "And I suggest you leave." The man didn't seem threatened by Jake's words. In fact, he didn't even flinch. Instead, he smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "I think you're mistaken, sir. Evelyn has been very hard to find, but I know she's here. I've been looking for her for a long time. It's only a matter of time before she'll have to face the consequences." Jake's heart raced. He didn't need to ask any more questions. He could see it in the man's eyes. He wasn't here for a friendly chat. He was dangerous, and he wasn't going anywhere without a fight. "Listen, I don't know who you are or what you think you're doing, but this is my ranch and I don't take kindly to threats," Jake said, stepping closer, his voice low but filled with authority. "I suggest you turn around and leave before things get worse for you." The man's smile didn't fade, but his eyes grew colder. "You don't know who you're dealing with, do you?" he said, his voice growing darker. "This isn't over, Mr. Richards. Evelyn will have to answer for what she's done, and you'll regret standing in my way." Before Jake could respond, the man turned and got back into his car. Without another word, he drove off. kicking up dust in the driveway as he sped away. Jake stood there for a long moment, watching the car disappear down the road, his mind racing. He had known trouble was coming, but he hadn't expected it to come so soon, or in such a chilling form. Jake didn't waste any time. He rushed back to the house, his mind set on one thing. He needed to find Evelyn. He didn't know who that man was, but he knew that his arrival meant danger was closer than ever. When he entered the house, he found Evelyn sitting by the window again, as she often did. Her eyes were distant, but there was a sense of awareness about her, as though she had been expecting something. "Evelyn, we need to talk," Jake said urgently, his voice tight with concern. "Someone's here. Someone looking for you." Evelyn's face went pale and she stood up quickly, her hands trembling slightly. "I knew this day would come," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I knew it wouldn't be long before he found me again." Jake's heart sank. He hadn't wanted to say it out loud, but now he had to. "It's the man you've been running from, isn't it?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Evelyn nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, he's dangerous, Jake. I've tried to get away from him for so long, but he always finds me. He won't stop until he has me." Jake's mind was spinning. He had known Evelyn was running from someone, but he hadn't fully understood the extent of the danger until now. The man who had come to the ranch wasn't just some casual threat. He was someone who would do anything to get what he wanted. "We need to leave," Evelyn said suddenly, her voice frantic. "We can't stay here. He'll come back. He'll bring people with him. We have to go, Jake. We can't wait any longer." Jake shook his head, refusing to let fear dictate their actions. "No, we're not running, not yet. I'll protect you, Evelyn. I'm not going to let him take you from here. But we need to think this through. We can't just run from him forever." Evelyn looked at him, her eyes filled with both gratitude and fear. She wanted to believe him, but the fear that had lived with her for so long was hard to shake. She had been running for months, always looking over her shoulder, never knowing if she was safe. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Jake," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I've been running for so long. I don't know how much longer I can keep going." Jake reached out and took her hand gently, squeezing it reassuringly. "You don't have to do this alone anymore, Evelyn. We're in this together. I'll figure this out. I won't let him hurt you." For a moment there was silence between them, but it wasn't the uncomfortable kind of silence. It was the kind of silence that came with understanding. Jake knew that the road ahead would be difficult. They were up against something far bigger than either of them could have imagined, but he was determined to protect her. He didn't know how they would deal with the danger that was coming, but one thing was certain: he wasn't going to let Evelyn face it alone. The days that followed were filled with a nervous energy that neither Jake nor Evelyn could shake. The man who had come to the ranch was a constant, haunting presence in their minds. Jake had never imagined that his life would take such a turn. He had always kept to himself, content with the solitude of his ranch, but now everything had changed. Evelyn's past was pulling them both into something much bigger than either of them had expected. Evelyn spent more time inside, her nerves stretched thin. She could feel the weight of the man's presence even though he was no longer physically here. The ranch, once a place of peace and security, now felt like a trap. It was as though they were waiting for something to happen, but no one knew exactly what. The days dragged on slowly, each one feeling like an endless countdown to something that was inevitably coming. Jake did his best to reassure Evelyn, but even he couldn't hide the unease in his voice. He hadn't felt this kind of pressure before. It was one thing to deal with cattle, broken fences, and endless chores, but this was something else entirely. He couldn't fight an invisible enemy, someone who was watching and waiting just out of reach. One morning, after an unusually quiet night, Jake woke up to a sense of dread that he couldn't shake. The air felt different, heavy with the kind of tension that made him feel as though something bad was about to happen. He had been awake for hours going over the situation in his mind when he heard a car engine approaching. Jake stood still for a moment, his heart pounding. This time, it wasn't just any car, it was the same black sedan that had arrived before. The man had returned. He rushed inside to find Evelyn sitting at the kitchen table, staring down at her hands. She looked up when she saw Jake, and he could tell that she knew what was coming. There was no surprise in her eyes, just a deep, weary resignation. She had been expecting this. "Evelyn, you need to stay inside," Jake said, his voice low and urgent. "I don't know what he wants, but I'm not letting him get near you." Evelyn's face tightened, but she didn't argue. She nodded and stood up slowly, walking toward the back of the house. Jake watched her go, his thoughts racing. He had made a promise to her. He wasn't going to let her down. But now he had to face the reality that they couldn't hide forever. Something was going to happen today, and he needed to be ready. As the black sedan pulled up to the driveway, Jake stepped outside, determined to face whatever was coming. He was tired of being pushed around. This was his ranch, his home, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it away from him. The man stepped out of the car, his polished shoes clicking against the gravel. He looked the same as he had the first time they met. Cold, calculating, and completely composed. This time, however, there was something different about him. The smile that had been so casual before was now gone. His expression was harder, colder. "Jake Richards," the man said, his voice smooth, but his words were laced with a sense of finality. "I know you're protecting her, but you need to understand this is bigger than both of you." Jake didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his arms crossed over his chest as he stared at the man. "I'm not going to let you hurt her," Jake said, his voice firm. "Whatever you think you're doing here, it ends now." The man's eyes darkened. "You don't understand. This isn't about you or me. This is about her. Evelyn has something that belongs to me, and I'm not leaving until I get it." Evelyn's name hung in the air like a heavy weight, and Jake's blood ran cold. He didn't know what this man was talking about. But one thing was clear, he wasn't going to leave without a fight. "She doesn't owe you anything," Jake said, his voice low and steady, trying to keep his cool. "And if you think you can intimidate me, you're mistaken." The man's eyes flickered, but he didn't back down. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he said, his voice almost a whisper, like a warning. "I'm not the kind of person who lets things go. You'll regret this." For a moment, the tension between them was palpable. Jake could feel it, like a tightrope stretched too thin. Any wrong move and the situation could escalate into something dangerous. He was ready, though. He wouldn't let this man take Evelyn away. Not without a fight. Suddenly, the man turned and walked back to his car. "I'll give you a day," he said over his shoulder. "A day to think about what you're really willing to risk. But know this, Jake. Time is running out." As the man got into the car and drove away, Jake stood there, his heart still pounding in his chest. He couldn't believe it. He had hoped that a confrontation would end differently. He had hoped that the man would just leave, that Evelyn's past would be gone for good. But it was clear now that this was only the beginning. Jake didn't know what to do next. He had tried to stand strong, but the man's words kept echoing in his mind. A day. That was all he had. He walked back into the house, his mind whirling. Evelyn was waiting in the back room as he had asked, her eyes wide with fear. She looked up when he entered, but he couldn't find the words to comfort her. He didn't know what to say. "That was him, wasn't it?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. Jake nodded. "He's not going to stop. He wants something from you, something you have. And I don't know what it is, but I'm going to find out. I'll make sure you're safe. I promise." Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I never wanted this to affect you, Jake," she whispered. "I thought I could handle it on my own. But I should have known better. I should have known this would catch up to me." Jake walked over to her, taking her hands in his. "You're not alone anymore, Evelyn," he said, his voice steady. "You have me now, and I'm not going anywhere." The look in Evelyn's eyes softened, a small, tearful smile forming on her lips. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake gave her a reassuring squeeze before releasing her hands. "We'll figure this out. We'll get through this together." The next few hours were filled with planning and worry. Jake knew that they couldn't just sit around and wait for the man to return. He needed to take action, but he wasn't sure what the right move was. He couldn't let the man control them, but he also couldn't put Evelyn in any more danger. As the sun set over the ranch, Jake made a decision. He couldn't just hide. He needed to take the fight to the man who had been tormenting Evelyn. The next day he was going to go to town, to talk to the local sheriff and anyone else who might know something about the mysterious figure who had been following Evelyn. He couldn't let her face this alone anymore. The night was long, but by morning Jake had a plan. He didn't know exactly how things would unfold, but he was ready to protect Evelyn no matter the cost. As the first light of dawn broke over the ranch, Jake stood at the window, watching the horizon. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. He was going to fight for Evelyn, for her safety, and for the life they were trying to build together. The world had suddenly become much bigger and much more dangerous, but he wouldn't back down. Not now, not ever.